It's been another long week in politics. Over the weekend, millions of people throughout Europe came out in solidarity with Gaza. Spearheading this movement was the Italian working class, which staged a powerful general strike, followed by millions taking to the streets. Meanwhile, another government in France has collapsed, only hours after being formed. Now, we'll be talking about all of these on today's show, but first we'll start with the breaking news of a ceasefire agreement having been reached between the United States, Israel, and Hamas, an agreement that's supposed to be followed by a more comprehensive peace agreement. Now, the first question we have to ask in this situation is this: who benefits from this peace, and will it last? My name is Hamid Alizadeh. I'm here today with Fred Weston, and this is Against the Stream. Now, Fred, there's this agreement. It's not clear. The details of it are not clear as of the time of this particular recording. But what we know so far is this, that an agreement has been reached for a ceasefire. This is not the full agreement that Trump presented, the 20-point agreement. But it involves an immediate ceasefire as soon as the agreement has been signed, followed by the release of the Hamas-held Israeli hostages and their bodies, as well as the release of 250 lifetime prisoners, Palestinian lifetime prisoners in Israel, and 1,700 prisoners who've been jailed since the war started. Mm-hmm. Now, that's supposed to be the first stage of a deal that would then go on towards a more long-term peace that we can talk about. But it's clear that this is not the full peace. Now, the second part of the peace is that a technocratic administration will be imposed on Gaza, led by Donald Trump and Tony Blair, the peaceful, most peaceful, peace-loving guardians of peace ever known to mankind. And Hamas will withdraw from, will cede control over Gaza. In the original agreement, it said it would demilitarize. We'll talk about that. And the people who will start patrolling Gaza, in effect, with armed forces, will be Islamic regimes such as Turkey, Egypt, Jordan, and others. It's not clear yet which ones these will be. What's your immediate reaction to this deal?
Well, first of all, I would compare what Trump has done with, if you hold a gun to somebody's head and say, hand over everything you have, otherwise I'm going to shoot. What choice do you have? This is not an agreement between equal partners on equal conditions. What he offered was, you either accept the deal or it's total obliteration, total massacre. This is the guy that's seeking the Nobel Peace Prize. Yeah. If they give it to him, it will add to the mockery of the whole thing over the years. But what seems likely is that at least phase one of this deal will be kept to, it will be signed up, and there'll be a ceasefire. Now, what we have to remember is there have been many, many ceasefires over the decades. All wars end eventually in one way or another, either with the victory of one or the other, or stalemate, a temporary peace. But unless the underlying problems are sorted, nothing has been solved. What you've done is a temporary peace, which obviously, I'm sure that a lot of the Palestinian people, ordinary people in Gaza, will be relieved at the idea that soon the bombs will stop dropping on them. Yeah. They won't have to worry where they're sleeping, where they're going. But it won't change the living conditions which have been created.
Yes, and also I would say, what is it? What are they getting? They're not getting the idea of a Palestinian homeland is further away than any time before.
Yes.
What they're getting is a committee that's going to manage their affairs.
And
That's
Donald Trump is going to be at the head of that committee. Did you
Yes, and this is a committee that doesn't have any relation to the Palestinian people. It's foreigners. It's an occupation. It's a colonial force almost. You can compare it to. Or I would rather compare it to a prison board. That's kind of what it is. And then they will be guarded and forced to accept the dictates of this committee by foreign troops as well. So the Palestinians are not getting anything from this.
They're not getting self-government.
No.
They're not getting a Palestinian state. In actual fact, Gaza and the West Bank have been separated for a long time. And Netanyahu always worked to keep it like that, because anything that got close to looking like a territory that could be given to the Palestinians to govern themselves had to be avoided. He always did that. In fact, he was happy to have Hamas governing Gaza in opposition to the administration in the West Bank. But this is simply a ceasefire, and then an outside force comes in. I was looking at the deal, and one of the points refers to even Palestinians who will be trained as police, as security forces, excluding Hamas, obviously. That reminds me a little bit of the West Bank, where the Palestinian Authority has a police force, but it's to police the Palestinians for Israel.
Yes.
This will be the same thing, with the added element that it would be a foreign force under the control of the imperialists, the Americans and others. Tony Blair, the man who took us into the Iraq War in Britain, is a joke. But he's probably going to be doing good business, that guy. But it's going to be a people who will be governed by others, not by themselves. Yeah. This is not giving the Palestinians what they desire. All they're doing is a temporary respite. That's what's happening.
Yeah. And then you have the Palestinians. I mean, the state of the condition of the Gazan population. Officially, 67,000 people killed. I'm sure the figure is much higher than that.
There's a lot more.
160,000 people injured. That's 10% of the population. More than 10% of the population. In reality, it's a lot more.
What that doesn't include, and it's people who have died as a consequence of the war, not being killed directly by bombing or shooting, but people who have died because the hospitals are destroyed, the ambulances can't get to them, or imagine having dialysis. In these conditions. I mean, you're going to die.
Sanitation destroyed, clean drinking water destroyed, electricity destroyed, food destroyed. 98% of cropland.
That's right.
According to some report, needs rehabilitation. That's just another way of saying it's completely unusable. It's probably filled with explosives and chemicals, and it will take forever to clean up. 90% of schools have been destroyed. All universities have been destroyed. Hospitals, doctors' clinics. All the basic conditions of civilized life has been completely destroyed. Now, in the deal, it says that there will be a reconstruction and so on, but we all know that is a long way from ever happening. The vast majority of buildings in Gaza have been destroyed. Almost all buildings have been damaged. Most of them have been completely destroyed, uninhabitable. Which means what? Which means in the best scenario, let's say, according to this plan, you will have a Palestinian population for decades of millions of people being forced to live in tents and barracks, makeshift, whatever, with little to no, none of the fundamental pillars of having of civilized life.
That's right.
And they'll be reduced to barbarism. That's what's going to be in store for them. So that is what the Palestinians are getting from this. And of course, you can say, I can imagine I've been following a few journalists, and they said there's a sense of relief in a way, because at least there's no more bombs falling for now. But it doesn't really solve anything for the Palestinians. The condition of the Palestinian people, and in particular the one in Gaza, has never been as bad as it is today. And there's no end in sight for this. There's no perspective for an improvement of this. But I think another pertinent question to ask is, what has changed in the past 2 years for this peace to come now? Right? And I think a lot of people will ask themselves this. Why was this peace not achieved while Biden was a president? Why wasn't he forcing this onto Netanyahu? Why wasn't Netanyahu? I mean, what did Netanyahu get? He said he would bring back the hostages. That's what he promised to the majority of the population. Then he promised his right-wing allies that he would annex Gaza. And he promised that he would destroy Hamas. None of that has happened.
Mm-hmm.
None of that has happened. And if anything, Gaza's left more ungovernable and more unstable than ever before. Although right now, maybe there's a temporary peace. So the question is, what changed?
I think what changed is not what was possible. They could have made a deal any time, obviously. What has changed is Israel has pushed the world situation to the limit. I remember when I was looking into this, when I wrote some articles at the beginning of the this conflict, one thing that struck me was this idea that the Israeli regime, historically, has always, whenever it's entered a war, this is not the first time we've had Gaza bombed. It's not the first time we've had a war. There have been many. And over history, if you look at it, the Israeli regime has used wars as a means of expanding its control. The big one was 1967, when they expelled 400,000 Palestinians from the West Bank and started the process of colonization. And you can see amongst themselves, they clearly, the Zionists, no, we want all of Palestine. That's the aim. This ridiculous idea, God gave it to us, so it belongs to us. But they also understood there's a limit beyond which you can't push what the Western powers can tolerate at home. And they always said, you push it to the limit. Once that limit is broken, you got to step back, consolidate what you've achieved, and wait for the next opportunity. Yeah. That's what they've done throughout history. What has happened here is because of the dramatic events of the 7th of October, which in effect gave Netanyahu internally inside Israel the excuse to go on a massive bombing campaign and destruction of Gaza, raising it as a threat to Israel, etc. And the West all came out, if you remember, the right of Israel to defend itself, Well, that has worn down over time. The masses of ordinary working people across Europe and across the world have been seeing the scenes of children being shot in the neck, starving babies, the whole place bombed to bits, all the killings, etc. It has reached the point where the ordinary decent working people couldn't take it anymore. And it was reaching the limit. And yet the governments of Western Europe continued with this idea, the right to defend itself. And people start saying, what do you mean the right to defend themselves? Tens of thousands of Palestinians have been killed. The proportion, it's so disproportionate. And the right of the Palestinians basically became a focal point for ordinary work across the world. And the governments have started to feel that pressure. In turn, even that symbolic recognition of the Palestinian state, which we know the material basis for it doesn't exist, but it was an attempt to say to Netanyahu, hey, please put an end, pull back. We can't take the pressure that's building up at home. That's what's changed. And the limit was reached, and we started to see these huge mobilizations, which are actually beginning to affect the politics in these countries. So what Netanyahu pushing his interests, there are these there's the interest of the whole Zionist ruling class, which we know what it is, but he also had his particular interests. We all know he's facing court trials all the rest of it. And he needed to keep the war going. So there's an element of his interests being pushed to the limit, and other things that changed. He bombed Doha. That is like crossing a red line for the Arab regimes. The Arab regimes are all too willing to cooperate and to normalize relations, and Trump has been trying to achieve that, the Saudis and the others. For him to have bombed was to push them to the point where they had to say to Trump, no, this, no more. We're not having this again. This guy has gone beyond the limit. You've got to do something. What's interesting is that what they openly said, either you stop this guy or we're going to have to turn to Russia and China.
Yeah.
Now, that shows you how Netanyahu has pushed it to the absolute limit, i.e., in effect, he was starting to threaten the interests of U.S. imperialism, i.e., by putting pressure on these Arab regimes, because you might imagine that the people in the Arab regimes watching their governments cooperating all the time, collaborating, and then this happens. Now, for Trump, I think that was an alarm bell for him too. It's like here he is. Here's the guy who's trying to reestablish the influence and the power of the U.S., which has been in relative decline, and a key region like the Middle East. He starts to see the regimes which he wants on board as allies, starting to use this language because of Netanyahu. Trump stepped in and he said to Netanyahu, so far and no further. Yeah. And he's even given military guarantees to Qatar now, reciprocal deals that if they get attacked, that's sending a message to Netanyahu, don't you dare do that again, because it's upsetting my interest in the region. It's like the big bully telling the little bully, listen, you're going a bit too far. We got common interests here, but you are threatening our interests, and you got to step back. Yeah. That's what Trump has done with Netanyahu.
That is. I think that sums it up very well. It's got nothing to do with peace, but I mean, Donald Trump does want the Nobel Peace Prize.
He wants a lot of things.
He's very intent on that. He is a narcissist, but it's not about peace. It's about their fundamental interests, as you said. They've been politically undermined. In the U.S., there was massive support for Israel over the years. It's all evaporated. Yeah. In the MAGA movement itself, there's a violent reaction against Israel and against Trump's association with Netanyahu. By the way, also against his attacks on Iran and so on. So he's beginning to feel it in the U.S. And then this Doha bombing pushes the Gulf regimes towards China. So it's the interest of the ruling class that's coming into conflict.
I wanted to say that he's an able maneuverer, Netanyahu. Yeah. And he thought that with this Qatar thing, he was carrying out a clever maneuver. Yeah. But when we say clever maneuverers, eventually run out of maneuvers. Yeah. And this is what has happened. Yeah. He's played his cards, and he's now like standing there. Where do I go next?
Well, we'll see. There's huge support for this deal now. There's enormous public opinion everywhere, including in Israel, where Netanyahu is incredibly unpopular. Vast majority of Israelis want Netanyahu to go. That's one of the reasons why he doesn't want to stop these wars, because as long as he's in government, first, he'll maintain power, which is absolutely important for him. Secondly, he'll stay out of jail, although now they try to fix deals to pardon him and all of these things. But for Netanyahu, this is not a victory. And by the way, personally, I want to see what happens, because this guy has got many tricks up in his sleeves, but he's been put in his place clearly by Trump. And obviously that raises a question as to why couldn't the liberals do it? Because Netanyahu wasn't imposing on their interests as much. That was essentially why. But for Netanyahu, this is a setback. This is a defeat, essentially. And for Israel, we're not saying this is a victory for the Palestinians and the Palestinian cause, but it is a defeat for Israel in that it didn't achieve any of its war aims. And it was forced to climb down, right? For many different reasons. the Arab regimes, as you said, they would love to have collaboration with Israel, but as long as this was going on, it was destabilizing the regimes in Jordan, in Saudi Arabia, in Egypt. Masses of people there, working class, poor people, in support of the Palestinians, wanting their governments to do something. In Jordan, there was big movements for Jordan to enter the war against Israel. And then obviously when they attacked Doha, this pushed them towards the Chinese. So they put the screws on, and they want to end this so that they can get back to business, which is what they really want. Now, the last element here is Hamas, and I think that we talked about it this morning. Jorge, was also co-host here on the show, made the point very correctly that there is probably a big mood for peace in Palestine. Well, we know that there is a big mood for a ceasefire, to end the bombing and so on.
Of course,
they want an end to this horrible state of things. But there must also be a questioning. What did we achieve? You did 7th of October, but what did you actually achieve? And I think that does put a pressure on Hamas and on them having to do something, in essence. But what will they gain out of this deal? That's the question. I think that's the last question we'll deal with here. Is the deal requires for them to demilitarize, which means like giving up all of their weapons. But that means committing suicide. That essentially means we're going to surrender, and we're going to assume that Israel is going to stick to its words, because Israelis are such honest and trustworthy people. Sorry, not Israelis, the Israeli government, the Israeli regime. We're going to take their word that we're going to give up all our weapons, we're going to give up all of our hostages, all of our leverage, and then they're just going to accept a peace with us. Obviously, that's not going to happen. So I think there is a conflict inside of Hamas. A lot of people, in particular on the ground, saying we can't accept this deal. This is a complete surrender. But what do you think? Where do you think this is going to end for Hamas?
Well, I'm not in Gaza. I'm not on the ground. I have read some reports that show that the leadership of Hamas in exile is the most open to a deal. The historical commanders that have survived internally also seem to be inclined that way. But the younger recruits, thousands of Hamas fighters have been killed, but thousands have replaced them. So there is going to be a layer there that feels very resentful after all this destruction. And the whole struggle of the Palestinian people, what is it for? To achieve statehood. They are a people without a state, without a place they can call their homeland, without the rights of genuine citizenship in this part of the world. That desire is never going to go away until it's actually achieved. Until the Palestinians achieve a homeland or a country where they can say, we are full citizens with full democratic rights in our historical homeland. Until they achieve that, this is going to be a festering wound in the Middle East. Trump is not going to solve the underlying problems that led to this. No, he can make a deal. He can promise reconstruction, which would take decades. The lives of these people have been dramatically changed. I was looking at 93% have been displaced. A home for a Palestinian today is a decent tent and a plot of land where you can keep it and not have to keep moving it, because that's what's been happening. They've been moving up and down, left and right, to the sea, away from the sea, to the north, back south. A people that's been displaced under constant bombing. It's absolute hell on earth what has been created for the Palestinians. Obviously, they want that to end. But once that has ended, the desire of this people to have their rights recognized is not going to go away. The struggle will continue. It has continued for decades. They suffered the Nakba. They suffered the 67 war and the expulsion of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. They were given this apparent semblance of self-administration in the Palestinian Authority, which was an absolute shambles, and it was false from beginning to end. And see how that has ended.
Yeah.
So whatever they achieve now is not going to be a solution to the underlying problem.
Yeah.
It will keep coming back so long as imperialism has its interests, so long as the Zionist ruling class has its interests are in place, so long as Arab regimes like the one in Qatar, like the one in Saudi Arabia, so long as these people remain in power, the Palestinians will actually be a nuisance for them. They want to normalize things. They can't normalize too far because their own people would rebel against them, because they recognize the Palestinians as brothers and sisters who have their rights, and you're doing nothing for them. And it would actually, in the coming period, connect with the actual growing internal problems in all these countries, the economic, social problems, which are creating ferment and an explosive situation. So it's all connecting up. The problem's not going to go away. And phase one is being signed. Nobody can guarantee whether 2 and 3 will actually be carried out.
Yeah, I mean, you can get rid of Hamas, but we said from the beginning that Hamas is not an organization as such. It's an idea. It's a reflection of a movement against oppression. I mean, we talk about the desire for a homeland, but even if we disregard that, just the desire not to be oppressed, that will be enough to force a resistance movement amongst the Palestinians, who are going to be suffering under terrible conditions, as you say, guarded by Arab troops.
Well, just one little point when you were saying that. The old leadership of the Palestinians, PLO, Fatah, etc., they eventually agreed to the Oslo Accords and the Palestinian Authority. They agreed to become the police force for the Israelis of the Palestinians. In the process, they've been exposed. In Gaza, Hamas took over as a consequence of that.
Exactly.
And in the West Bank, they're discredited.
Precisely.
Now, Hamas, we'll see how it goes. I mean, they're obviously in big difficulties. If they accept concessions, which means de facto giving up on the struggle, just as the Palestinian Authority conceded influence to Hamas, Hamas can concede influence to somebody else, can appear on the scene. Somebody who will say, we are continuing the struggle of the Palestinians in one way or another. That will keep coming back.
Exactly. I think that's a good point to end it here. This is obviously a topic that we have and will continue to follow. Now, we've had an incredibly explosive almost situation in Europe over the past weekend. We had a national student strike in Spain, 2 million people on the streets. There's been another partial general strike called on the 15th, all in support for Gaza, by the way. In the Netherlands, 250,000 people on the streets, which is big for the Netherlands. It's a big shift in public opinion. Huge protests all over Europe, Belgium, Germany, Ireland, Portugal, Switzerland, and many other places. The head of this, you can say, was in Italy, where you saw a thunderclap, I would almost say, of the Italian working class coming onto the scene. This was an unprecedented event. We've seen a series of movements. We followed it over the past month or so in solidarity with Gaza, semi-general strikes and so on. And on Thursday night, we saw when the aid flotilla was intercepted, last Thursday night, intercepted by Israel. We saw spontaneous mass protests erupting all over Italy. That was Wednesday night, sorry. Throughout Thursday, we saw, again, huge protests everywhere with people blocking train stations, blocking ports, and so on and so forth. Then on Friday, we saw a massive general strike, called by the CGIL and the USP. CGIL is the biggest trade union federation. The USP is the smallest one, probably. And millions of people on strike in support. This is a political general strike in solidarity with Gaza. And then you saw over the weekend, in particular on Saturday, again, up to 2 million people on the streets. 1 million man march in Rome. We've seen a rising movement of direct action, people blocking, as I said, train stations and so on, but also more importantly, ports, with dock workers and activists blocking the how do you say, Israeli-bound ships from, loading and docking and so on and so forth. This is, by the way, spread. The idea of blocking shipments to Israel is beginning slowly to spread. It's becoming more and more widespread. There was a dock workers union, all European-wide dock workers meeting in Genoa, which put this forward. Nicholas, another co-host here, was saying yesterday that in Sweden, actually, some of the dock workers have been doing this already for a year. So this is gaining ground, and it has completely changed everything. But this is not just in relation to Gaza. This is a broader thing, and there's a change of mood, isn't there?
Yes. There's a huge change of mood. Italy has dramatically changed as a result of Gaza. But it's not just Gaza. It's the connection of the butchery, the tremendous oppression of the Palestinian people that millions of people in Italy have reacted to. But it's connected also to the problems in Italy. We've said it. Gaza has been like a catalyst, which has brought to the surface all the contradictions in Italian society. I could give you some facts to show you what the situation is in Italy before we go back to this question. Italy is the country in Europe which has actually seen not just a fall in wages because of inflation, an actual nominal decline in wages over the last 20 or 30 years. And since 2008, real wages have gone down by 9%. That's the real scenario that you have in Italy. Now, with that, add to that the cumulative inflation of the period 2021 to 2023 of 18%. And you actually have statistics which show 30% of households in Italy have actually reduced the quantity or the quality of the food when they do their grocery shopping every week. And even those that haven't reduced the quantity will reduce the quality because of the falling purchasing power, the falling wages. But on top of that, the general situation in Italy, the debt, which is close to 140% of GDP, 3 trillion euros. Productivity is stagnant. Investment is stagnant. Wages are way behind the rest of Europe. And the economy has been, in effect, stagnant, 0 to 1% growth, almost nothing. The age of retirement has been increased. And some figures I was looking at is that the number of people who've given up, for instance, on a minor operation they might need, or even serious operations, because the waiting list is literally years. Unemployment has been creeping up. Youth unemployment is over 20%. The social economic conditions in Italy are intolerable for the masses. All they have is now 2 or 3 decades of constant pressure, constant whittling away of the real value of wages, living conditions, healthcare, education. All of this has been building up and building up and building up. And at the same time, as this is happening, they're being told you've got to accept more sacrifices in order to spend billions on increasing military spending. In effect, permanent austerity, no future, no prospect of any improvement for the forthcoming future, and especially the youth can see that. These are the conditions in which this recent event took place. That's what we have to look at and understand. I was making the comparison. I was reading about Vesuvius recently, the volcano, and one report said, it's been dormant since 1944. Hasn't erupted since. But it said it's not if it will ever erupt. It's just a question of when. It will inevitably erupt, and when it does, because of the long period of that's been dormant, it will be one hell of an eruption. I was thinking that actually describes the whole of the Italian situation.
Yeah.
It's been not completely dormant. Obviously, there's always been events, but relatively calm, in spite of all these worsening conditions. And there was a mood up until not so long ago of when is anything going to move?
Yeah.
When is things? We as Marxists have every confidence. I said I used to hear people saying, when the Italians going to ever do anything? And I used to think they will move. They will move. History shows that, and it's being prepared. And here we have it.
Yeah, and I mean, not just here we have it. This is an incredible event because the level. When you talk with people on the left, often you get this cynical, but people are not so. The consciousness is so backward, and people can't see as far as you do, and they haven't read this and that, and people are uneducated. This is what we always say. Oh, the working class is uneducated. But here you have millions of people striking. That's going on a political general strike for international solidarity. That is a very high level of conscience, which shows that consciousness is a reflection of conditions and not a reflection of who manages to deceive you or educate you in the right way or input the right ideas into your mind. Not that education is unimportant, but it's reality that educates the working class every single day. I remember when I was a kid, when I was a young teenager, I'm still young, people would say, you can have a revolution, but not an international one, right? Now here we have a situation, first of all, this is happening in a context where there's mass revolutionary movements and very big movements all over the world at the moment. Indonesia, Morocco, Madagascar, Philippines, now Italy, Spain, and so on. Not only that, but then here you have in Italy a very advanced international class solidarity with their brothers and sisters in Palestine. Now, one thing that I think the paradox that's revealed here, which again the left could never explain. The general is talking about the broad left, right? This wasn't supposed to happen, was it? No. Because not only were we told that the people will not come out and strike or whatever for other people, but we're supposed that Italy is fascist and is right-wing, reactionary mood. Italian people have voted in Meloni, who's a far right. Her party is linked to the fascists, and there are people who are hiling and doing the fascist salute and so on. How can we explain this? On the one hand, you have a general strike with millions of people on the streets on a very high level of consciousness. On the other hand, in the sphere of politics, you have a right-wing party, a bourgeois, populist, racist party with a racist demagogy. By the way, that's also been attacking and cutting for the past years, but we'll get to that. How do we explain this? Where's the left?
Well, where's the left? The word left in Italy, amongst the millions of ordinary working people, for many of them, has lost the meaning it once had. Because what is being presented as the left are, in effect, bourgeois politicians. In Italy, you have this the centre-left and the centre-right. You see, there's no such thing as the left and the right. Everything has to be close to the centre, all about moderation. So you have these alternating centre-left and centre-right coalitions. Now, I was looking at the who's governed Italy for the past 30 years or so.
27 years, I think you told me.
Yeah, I was looking at who governed Italy before Meloni came in, because the victory of Meloni was a sudden change, obviously, because she had 4%.
Yeah.
Somebody who had 4% 3 years ago is now the Prime Minister of Italy.
Yeah.
That is a sudden change. How did that happen? Well, in the previous 27 years before Meloni came to power, for a majority of those years, I think about 2/3 of that period, Italy was governed either by left or centre-left coalitions or by technocratic governments which the left supported in one way or another.
Yeah.
So this left is tainted with all the policies of the past 30 or more years, all the austerity that's been carried out. I went and looked up an interesting study by two professors. I've got it here. I wanted to quote it if you give me a minute. It's the study. It's by two professors at the Lewis University in Rome. It's a private university in Rome, the Department of Political Science. And it's about privatization in Italy. And it explains how, I mean, there were privatizations previously, but the actual big push for privatization began in the 90s. And he studies, these professors studied what happened after more or less 1992. There's a lot I could go into about that period, but there's no time here. But what's interesting from this study is that he shows that once the program of privatization was launched, and interestingly, there were two technocratic governments. There's been many, but there were two. One was the Ciampi government and the Dini government. These two governments. Ciampi was the ex-governor of the Bank of Italy.
Yeah.
Dini was the ex-governor of the Bank of Italy. Italy has had a lot of these technocratic governments. Draghi, more recently, was the ex-governor of the European Central Bank. The Italian bourgeoisie has actually placed the men of finance capital in the key position of prime minister
When they needed it.
governing over the country and running the process of privatization, austerity, tax on pensions, the Dini pension reform all those years ago, which had the impact of reducing the size of people's pensions. More recently, they've increased the age of retirement. It's been constant pressure for 30 years. This report actually says that once the process started in the 90s, every time there was a change, let's say a shift from the centre left to the centre right and back again, there was never an interruption of this program. Or both fronts, both centre left and centre right, carried out this program incessantly for 30 years. But what it does highlight, it actually says, at one point, I want to find it. They asked the question. Let's see if I can find it.
Who made the most cuts?
It says, here it is, the question. Are Italian privatizations right-wing or left-wing? Interesting question. The conclusion he comes to is neither, because both of them. But he does say that these professors do say that they both carried on the same program, but far more was achieved by the centre left in terms of privatization than the centre right. The centre left parties, the ex-Communist Party transformed first into the PDS and now it's the Democratic Party, in different coalitions, contributed massively to privatizing the huge public sector that existed. And he says there's no fundamental difference. That's what we have to understand when we look at the political situation in Italy. And you ask yourself, why isn't the left strong? Why can't it win? Why did it lose the election? Well, the reason is to be found in this. In the eyes of millions of, a lot of Italian workers, the centre-left, or the left, la sinistra, is responsible for cutting my pension. It's responsible for increasing the age of retirement. It's responsible for a lot of the cuts in healthcare, education reforms, which is financing private schools. All of this is the reality that millions of Italian workers have faced. That explains the political scenario. There's something else I wanted to show, if I can. This is a graph which shows the participation in elections over the past, 70 years. If you look at 1976, more than 93% of Italians participated in elections. In the last election, in 2022, there was a record fall. less than 64% participated in elections. The biggest party in Italy is actually the party of the people that say, I can't see any difference between the others, and I'm not going to vote. Now, we've said this before. That means that, in effect, both centre-left and centre-right, in these conditions, when they win the elections with the support of a minority of the population.
Yeah.
No government can claim to actually represent the Italian people.
Yeah.
I've said it before, I'm not going to go into all the figures, I could put this in an article, but the Meloni government, it was the right-wing coalition around Meloni, only got the support of about a quarter of the population in the elections of 2022. And this has continued. It's continuing. On Sunday, for example, there were elections in Calabria, and the same thing happened. Or actually worse, only 43% went to vote. The right wing are happy. Meloni, yes, the people support us. Well, they're all happy because they won, I think, 57%.
Yeah.
But of 43, it's more or less one quarter of the electorate that backs them directly, right? That means the overwhelming majority do not feel represented by these governments. And the reason for that is the alienation of millions of workers and youth in Italy from the political establishment. I was looking at one figure that showed that trust in the political parties is below 20%.
In fact, it's 19%, and trust in parliament is at 31%.
That's right.
And I think this is the thing, when people say, "Oh, why do people vote for Meloni? Are they?" There's this kind of cynical, dismissive. "Oh, people are just stupid. They're idiots. They vote for Meloni." Well, Meloni, when she was elected, was led the only party that had not participated in all of these vicious attacks. Some people call her far right. What is more far right about her than there was about all of these things? When we talk about cuts to healthcare, when we talk about cuts deep, the cost of living crisis, isn't that taking people's lives away? Isn't that causing them to die earlier? I mean, we've seen that. There's been a pressure on life expectancy amongst working class and poor people all over the West. And Italy is no exception in this.
I've spoken to some people on the left in Italy, the so-called left.
Yeah.
People who sort of will vote for the Democratic Party or even members of it. And they treat the population as if it's the people that are stupid.
Yeah.
How can they keep voting this way? How can they vote? And they're even saying they're voting for the far right. This is not the far right. Yeah. This is the right-wing conservative wing of Italian politics, carrying out the interests of the ruling class. Yeah. As I said before, when the centre-left were in, they were carrying out the interests of the same class.
Yeah.
In the eyes of millions of people, you can't go to millions of Italian workers and say, you got to vote for me, the centre-left, because otherwise the right wing will come in. That's the argument.
That's what they've done for years.
So basically, you've got to vote in favour of increasing your age of retirement, cutting pensions, cutting wages, massive cuts to healthcare, huge queues, years to wait for an operation.
Education.
If you're young, no future, no jobs prospects, nothing. This is what I'm offering you, but you've got to keep voting for me because I stopped the right. Well, it doesn't work. Yeah. And Meloni comes in and promises, obviously, to sort things out. And because she's not being tested, that was before 2022. I mean, she was a junior minister in previous governments, but her party was in opposition when Draghi was governing, and she benefited from the disillusionment with that government and was able to win. Now, should we be blaming the people for not understanding? Or should we be saying to these so-called left leaders, shouldn't you be looking at your program, your policies, and the way you've behaved over the last 30 years? You can't, there's that old saying, if you don't like if the government doesn't like the people, it can replace the people. You know? It doesn't work like that. What's happening is there's a huge a separation from the mass of ordinary people and the political establishment.
And I will say one thing. For all of those who say, oh, no, we can't be too radical because the working class doesn't want to look at the workers. They just want to vote for racists. These are the arguments that we hear. Well, actually, what happened in Italy here was you have on the ground a huge seething anger amongst the working class that's not being reflected. It's finding a small, distorted reflection in when Meloni was elected. Now her popularity is tanking as well. By the way, this is the future of America. This is the future of Trump and all
Trump's
of
going
these
to face
people,
this
right?
at some point.
But this anger is not getting an outlet. The old parties, the old so-called traditional leaders are playing the same games again and again, which is why when you have a local election the day after these million-man marches, there's no change because people don't see an alternative in the traditional established working class leaders of the working class. Now,
yeah.
but there's one thing, which is you've had in this situation, you have a small trade union federation, which was for years on the far kind of a very obscure fringe of the, although they do have a couple of 100,000 members, but it's a very small federation who came out for whatever reason and put forward the radical demand of a general strike, right? And they carried it out and they had a huge response. And they tapped into this mood, which was spreading at that time from France to Italy. They were the block everything movement in France. Then it started moving to Italy. They tapped into that. And this put the head of the CGIL, the main trade union federation, on the spot. They needed to react. So they called for a general strike. This general strike was called by this tiny union of 250,000 people. The CGIL has 5.1 million members, although half of those are pensioners, but still 2.5 million workers. And they had to come out. And they actually they attacked left. They spoke with the left rhetoric. And they were attacked by the government. And they stood up and they had to defend this. By the way, these are people who haven't done anything for years, right? We're not just making this up. For years, they've been playing along with this whole charade that you talked about. But as soon as they opened their mouths, they had this huge echo, which just gives you, this is, by the way, only a glimpse of the enormous pressures that exist in Italian society. This is just the first. If they had continued this, if there was a sustained campaign to build on this movement, towards a general strike to overthrow the movement, connecting this with questions of austerity and living standards and nationalizing everything that's been privatized, nationalizing the commanding heights of the economy, if this was connected to a strong working class program, this would have been the start of a revolutionary movement.
Yes.
Which is the mood that exists latently everywhere, but which is not being reflected by the traditional leaders. And obviously then it finds distorted ways of expressing itself. Meloni was one of them. But as you said, Meloni has now been tested for 3 years and she's not delivered. We don't know what's going to happen. There might be, you say there might be a new coalition of Five Star and the PD and so on. We don't know what's going to happen. But the idea that you can just deceive people into voting for you, there is a limit to that. Yeah, you can deceive people. When there's no clear alternative, you can come out with lies and say it's all the fault of the immigrants and this and that. But sooner or later, if you can't feed people, if the bread that people are relying on gets less and less and less, they will react. Mm-hmm. And this is what we see in Italy.
Yeah, well, look, the public debt in Italy is so big, it's becoming unsustainable for the capitalist class. 3 trillion euros and something like close to 140% of GDP. And it keeps going up. Paradoxically, 30 years of privatizations, if you read those professors, who are bourgeois, by the way, they list how much they got for this and how much they got for that by selling it. They sold all the, as you say, the
crown jewels,
the family jewelry,
yeah.
And they still are in debt. And the debt has actually increased in spite of all of that because there is the massive interest to pay on it. But you see, whoever comes to the government in a country like Italy is then presented with the figures by the serious bourgeois. And they say, this is the debt. This is the situation we're in. This is the international scenario. You must cut. Do what you can.
Yeah.
You got to cut. The centre-left did that. Meloni came in. She continues. She made a big noise against Draghi. And then everybody says, well, she's carrying on with Draghi's policy.
Yeah.
It's the same policy. As he said, 30 years, centre-left, centre-right, no changes. Because even if you're a left party, or even the Democratic Party, which is difficult to call it left anyway, you come to government, if your starting point is that everything has to be done within the confines of the capitalist system, everything has to be done within, the finances of the state, the structure of the capitalist economy, the banking system, finance capital, the European Union, international, you've got to play according to the rules of the system. And those rules are, the debt has to be reduced. Therefore, whoever comes in, the program is there. You got to carry on, as we saw before. Meloni is doing that now. But you see, Meloni shows one thing. A party of 4% can suddenly, boom, govern the country, basically. Mm-hmm. A very sharp turn in the situation, in a certain negative sense. On the other side, on the left, we have a certain parallel. The USB is a small trade union force, right? Mm-hmm. There's been a very hostile relationship between the USB and the CGL for years. The USB is a kind of more radical left union. They issued a call that had a massive echo. Why? Because millions of people were just waiting for that kind of call to be issued. And that forced the CGIL to shift its ground, join a strike with the USB, which is unprecedented. But what I'd like to add to this is, once the CGIL called the strike, you see the power of the old organizations in terms of support. Millions of people joined. Yeah. Now, what you were saying before about, when we talk about the prospects of socialism and international socialism and world revolution, for years, it could seem that you were talking about unrealistic, it's impractical, it's utopian, how can that be? Well, what's happened in Italy is a consequence of the events in Gaza. Yeah. Two countries, very different and yet connected. What has happened in Italy had an immediate impact on Spain. What's happening in Italy was also the effect of the situation in France. Mm-hmm. Historically, France and Italy have very often influenced each other politically. Even the working classes. May 68 had a huge impact on the Italian working class, and they had their hot autumn in 1969. Today, we're seeing how it's even more internationalized, the whole situation. What's happening in Italy is being observed by workers and youth around the world. The potential for a repeat of this kind of movement is there. Why? Because the conditions I listed earlier on about Italy, we could sit down and discuss Spain, we could discuss France, we discuss Germany, and you'd find the same kind of thing. Inflation, real wages down, cuts, healthcare system in decline, everything. The welfare system is being destroyed, the privatizations are taking place. Everybody's suffering the same conditions. Therefore, a spark can ignite a fire in a situation like this. Yeah.
I think that's a good ending to this this segment.
There is one little thing I wanted to add, if I can, which is I just wanted to show you how sometimes the intelligent bourgeois reach the same conclusions as the Marxists.
Oh, yes.
But from a different class point of view. What for us is a positive development, for them is a negative development, but they see the same phenomenon. I've got here a quote from a paper. It's called Il Foglio. It's a right-wing journal, and it was looking at this movement that we had in the last few days in Italy, the mass movement. It's interesting. They're looking at it, and this guy asks the question. He says, you could ask yourself, what more beautiful scenario than to see tens of thousands of young people coming onto the streets to put an end to a terrible war? This should be a marvelous thing. But he says, I'm going to explain to you why I don't think that's the case. And he actually points out that what's happened here is that the Gaza question and the Palestinian cause has been connected. He calls it with all the social struggles in Italy are being connected up. And he talks about a new generation of young people, politicized. And he says this is how he concludes the article, the real news, the novelty in the situation is the birth of a political generation that has learnt to connect the struggle of, he calls it the global Israel, with all the local struggles. And he ends up, and this is not good news. This is a bourgeois saying, the youth, this new generation, becoming politicized and connecting up the international situation with all the problems at home in Italy into one is bad news. What it means is this. Whatever happens in Palestine next, they make a deal, there might be a temporary pause, let's say, in the conflict. What has happened is, what has been brought to the surface is this generation, which has no future, and is becoming politicized. And what the movement in Italy has shown to the youth and to the workers is their own power. That's the most important element we have to understand. You know, you can be an individual and think, oh, I'm angry, but I'm just in a minority. Nobody's interested. Nobody cares. And yet, it's actually millions of people thinking like that. And what this happens is, this movement does, it brings it all out, and all these individuals suddenly look around and realize
we're not alone.
We're millions. Now, that is a leap in consciousness, which means we can achieve our goals. We can fight. You can expect the next period to see greater instability and greater class conflict in Italy and in other countries.
It makes me think of one of my favorite series, Succession. There's two billionaires talking with each other, and one of them says to the other, you know, in ancient Rome, they were considering giving all the slaves similar tunic. And he said, but they decided not to do that because if they could see how many they were, they would rise up and overthrow them. And that is the question. That is the situation. We have on the one hand a tiny group of parasites ruling the destinies of billions of people, and on the other hand, billions of people who create all of the wealth in the world and make the society run, who are at their mercy. And if they only knew the power that they possess, they could change everything. Now, speaking of the parasitic clique at the top, France, where Italy is spearheading the class struggle in Europe at the moment, the French ruling class must be spearheading the meltdown of the ruling classes, because just the last brief segment, we've seen Sébastien Lecornu resign over the past week, the fourth prime minister in less than a year. He was a prime minister. His government existed for 800 and some minutes, as far as I understand, less than a day. And they are now trying to cobble together, as of the moment of this recording, they're trying to cobble together a government, a caretaker government, or some sort of a government, because they need to pass a budget by next week. Otherwise, last year's budget will just roll over, and the question of the debt, the question of the deficit will continue, will get even worse. France, like many other countries, is a similar situation than Italy. 3.5 trillion euros of debt, 115% of GDP. The yearly deficit is 6 to 7% now. Interest rates are going up. By the way, the fall of this government has pushed interest rates even further up, because who wants to buy
French debt
when they are looking at this shit show? And then you have the working class, which is similar to Italy, increasingly restive. We've had the Block Everything movement, started in France about a month ago. Hundreds of thousands of people, but a grassroots initiative, basically, not called by any traditional organization. We've dealt with this before. There's been a general strike, a day of action called by the unions. And what Le Cornu was faced with was a government that was a poison chalice. No one wanted to be near it because everyone knew that it's not going to happen. They need to pass a budget which includes severe cuts. And no one wants to do that because everyone knows that elections are coming. And as soon as elections come, whoever voted for that budget is gonna lose. And so they can't agree. This is a situation. Here you have a situation where you have an economic crisis is leading to increasing pressure from below, the working class beginning to move, the youth beginning to move, and that disrupting the working of the whole political system.
Mm-hmm.
What are your comments on this so far?
Well, it's interesting. First of all, the slogan of the Italians, blocchiamo tutto, is a direct translation of bloquons tout. It came from the French. You see how they influence each other. Same situation produces similar phenomena. But if we look at France, France is the second economic power of the European Union after Germany. Italy's number 3. Listen, we're just speaking about number 2 and number 3 here in the European Union.
Yes.
The instability of these two countries. Spain and the others are not far behind. But what's happening in France is the French bourgeoisie is under enormous pressure to act, to get its act together, basically. You've wasted time. They have carried out attacks, but they've not gone as far as, say, the German bourgeois did previously. The French ruling class cannot afford to continue like this because they are facing a serious financial crisis. That's what's happening. To stay in the world market, they've got to attack. But basically, they've got to attack the cost of labor. That's what it comes down to. And the cost of labor is not just the direct wages. There's the social wage, as we were saying about Italy. It's pensions, it's healthcare, all the social benefits of a welfare state combined with the real wages. This is the combined, you could say, wages of the working class. They've got to massively cut. They've got a problem. The French working class has a tradition. It actually goes right back to the French Revolution. I think in the French consciousness, there is this element. When things get really bad, you just cut people's heads off at the top. They got rid of the king.
Just to say, legal disclaimer: we don't.
No, I'm not suggesting.
We don't suggest.
I'm not suggesting that, but I'm saying that that's their history, and it's not just the French Revolution. It's 1830, 1848, the Paris Commune. The first attempt of any working class in history to actually take power and change society was the French working class. And then there's the 30s, and May 68, the powerful move. It's in the consciousness, and it can recede, but it keeps coming back when a critical moment is reached, and we're facing one of those moments. Now, the problem they've got, they don't have a majority in Parliament for either the left or the right. The centre ground is being squeezed. The problem of forming this government is that nobody wants to commit suicide before the elections, i.e., nobody wants to be involved in the severe cuts. Because what they're saying is, look, I read a comment. There is a majority in the French Parliament, and it's the majority of those who don't want to go to elections. Because if they go to elections, they don't know how it's going to turn out. And they also agree we have to vote this budget before the end of the year. This is a critical situation they're in. They cannot find a majority. Now, Le Pen, her party, has more than once expressed the availability of governing the country, but doesn't want to take the blame now. They clearly want to go to elections at some point and massively win, like Meloni won in Italy. There's a wing around Macron, doesn't want to give up on that front, and is desperately holding on. He does not represent, he has never represented a majority of the French people. At the most, he got 20-25%, and that will have gone even further down now. So the centre is really being squeezed. Then you have the socialists and others who they've done it before. They've governed and they've carried out austerity, But to do it again now would be like, it would be for the final act of political suicide. So there's an impasse that's being created. But I've heard all the comments comparing France today to France of the Fourth Republic of the 1950s, the instability, one government coming in, another one going out, all the ungovernability of the country. Back then, they found the strong man, which was de Gaulle in 58. But how did de Gaulle's government administration end? It took a decade. Now, remember, it was a decade in the conditions of an unprecedented economic boom, which allowed them a certain stability. But even in those conditions, the political solution to the instability of the 50s eventually led to May 68, one of the biggest movements of the working class we've ever seen in history. 10 million workers on strike, occupying the factories. That is how that crisis eventually ended. Today, the crisis is far deeper. There's no economic boom that can give them the stability. That this process is going to be clearly far faster than what we saw in the 50s and 60s. What's being prepared is a new type of May 68. And it's going to be in France, it's going to be in Italy, it's going to be in Spain. But today, it's also going to be in Holland, in Denmark, in Sweden, in Germany, in Britain. It's coming. We are entering a period of extreme instability. And we are going to see sharp swings to the right, followed by also sharp swings to the left. There's going to be both. And they're all going to be put to the test. That's what's going to happen. This is going to clarify in the minds of millions of people the impossibility of running this system in the interests of the working class. It opens up big possibilities for the ideas of genuine revolutionary communism. That is what we've got to understand.
Yeah, I mean, we always say that a revolution doesn't start from the bottom. A revolution starts from the top. On the basis of enormous social and economic pressures, you see a division at the top in the run-up to a revolutionary situation. And what Lenin explained, that the ruling class ceases to be able to rule the way it used to.
Yes.
And what you have in France, and what you have in one country after another, in fact, in Europe, the situation in France and Italy are not unique. As you said, they are the same everywhere. Maybe it's with slightly different tempos and cadences, but essentially the same. What you have is a ruling class and a dominant elite, you can say, that's lost control over their own system. You had for decades the Socialist Party and the Republicans in France, just like in Italy you had bourgeois organizations that were relatively dependable for the capitalists to run the system, to make the necessary cuts, to do the necessary privatizations, this and that. But after decades of austerity, after decades of attack, they've been destroyed. The Socialist Party is a shadow of itself. The Republicans are almost disappearing. And at the same time, you've had the rise of two other political forces. You have on the right, the populists, Le Pen, and on the left, you have Jean-Luc Mélenchon and France Insoumise. But here you have Macron personally. He's also an egocentrist. I mean, just like all of them, I guess. But he has a personal ambition. But also, it kind of aligns with the ambition of the elite, of the establishment, you can say, the dominant wing and political representatives of the dominant wing of the ruling class, who want to maintain power at any cost. Which is why, for example, and that is a part of this whole crisis, which is why they haven't. The party with the biggest number of votes, biggest share of the votes in parliament in the elections, was Le Pen's party. Mm-hmm. The party with the biggest number of MPs, because of all sorts of maneuverings and so on, well, it ended up being the left, Mélenchon's organization. The traditional right was the smallest coalition, but Macron refuses to let any of the others actually build a coalition and actually take a premiership. And this is obviously a part of this whole thing. And now you see a situation where the whole system is falling apart but he's desperate to maintain it. And there are many strong interests in favor of maintaining power in Macron's hands. He refuses to call new parliamentary elections. He refuses to call new presidential elections. So he's ruling with a mandate of almost zero.
Mhm.
The vast majority of people want him to leave his position, call new elections and everything, refusing to do so. Why? Because what would be at stake? It would be the whole EU project. It would be the whole Ukraine project. Again, an international cause which is affecting consciousness. The question of militarization, the question of austerity, all of these things would come under question mark. There would be a huge question mark over them. And the ruling class cannot accept that. It needs to proceed. So you have a situation where there's total chaos, as you say, is ungovernable. The top central clique refuses to give up power. There are wings that say we need to slash really hard. As the Republicans, one of the reasons they didn't want to join the government was that Lefebvre was a part of it. He was one of those people who has been joining in a debt bonanza. He's leading the debt bonanza. So no, they say we need cuts. And then you had the socialists who were saying, oh well, we need to have a wealth tax, and we need to be careful of how much we cut, because otherwise we're gonna raise the ire of the working class. There's the crisscrosses of divisions and disunity and conflict right at the top, which means that they can't govern. And all of that, obviously, the French working class can see.
Mm-hmm.
And that situation is spreading from one country after another. In fact, the majority of these countries relying now on scaremongering. The Russians are coming, so hence we need to militarize. And therefore, obviously, we also need to cut. And therefore, you also need to keep us in power. This is tricks, deceptions, but all things have a limit, don't they?
Yes.
Everything has a limit. And sooner or later, we're going to see major explosions, which are going to dwarf the one we saw in Italy, by the way. This is just the beginning. Europe is now at the center of the crisis and also moving fast to be the center of the class struggle. Revolutions are on the agenda in Europe as well, at the same time as everywhere else.
I often quote the 10, 15 years previous to the French Revolution. The big question was the debt. And the big question was who is going to pay for that debt? And the ruling classes, the aristocracy, the clergy, the monarchy, none of them were prepared to pay. So they wanted the poor people at the bottom, the peasants and the urban poor, to pay. And there were struggles that lasted for several years, ups and downs. We know how it ended. The solution was the French Revolution. Yeah. Today, the question of the debt is the key question. Who is going to pay? Is it going to be the working class, or is it going to be the ruling class? They have the power. They want the workers to pay. The workers are showing repeatedly they're not prepared to accept this any longer, and they're beginning to move. That's what the scenario is about. Yeah. And if you want to reconnect everything together, the terrible suffering of the people in Gaza is part of this world crisis of the system. If the workers of Italy, of France, of Spain, and other countries can overthrow this rotten system, and the governments which supported the Zionists who did that to the Palestinians, overthrowing the ruling classes here would be an enormous help to the people of Palestine, because it would mean the end of the Zionist elite as well. Yes. And it would be the beginning also of an Arab revolution. And you can see the outlines of it. And within that, we can solve the problem of the Palestinians.
Exactly. I think that's a perfect place to end. For all of you out there who've joined us today, thank you very much. Don't forget to like and share our material to your friends, families, co-workers, anyone you think would be interested. And also don't forget to look at our reading guide, where we will share material in relation to the themes that we discuss on the topic. That's it for today. We'll be back again Thursday, 6 p.m. UK time next week.